So, have you wondered why popular things tend to suck? Of course, there are exceptions. But generally speaking, if you can make the most money, that's what you gotta go for. Even if it comes at the enjoyment of certain audience members. If you can broaden the audience, that's great. And of course, the more money goes into a project, the more it becomes actually a requirement to try to go for a broad audience. Essentially, a chef is incentivized to not serve the best food to any particular person, but serve the food that most people are willing to eat. If you can have more customers and have worse food, then it's worth it. In fact, if you can cut down on the product, the quality of the product, and have the same customers, that's also worth it. Of course, if you can try to make your customers pay more, of course, in this context, I suppose you can argue that the product is the same, but I suppose the value received is not. But perhaps this would be still the most permissive example. Generally speaking, if you can broaden the appeal of something at the cost of your current audience liking it less, or you can just make it worse while cutting costs and the audience likes it less, but still stays, then that's more money. So while the audience and possibly the players might talk about like what is good and what is not, businesses don't tend to think along those lines, but how to make the most money, right? If they could just have empty promises, just a vehicle, and everyone buys that, or everyone just watches that, just totally black screen, and that's it. They pay for that. That's a good deal. That's a good business. And if people come back, then even better. You can call it the darkest horror yet. And it's just a black screen. And in many contexts, you might argue that this could be somewhat justified because it needs to be something that appeals to a mass audience a little bit. Because you need a lot of players. So suppose you would be doing some kind of MMORPG, then I guess you would need a fair amount of players. You can niche down too much. But when it comes to single player games, or possibly even books, yeah, there's not really a good reason for it. Although, if you can have like 10 times the audience, right, then it is tempting to do so. And that's why you might see that, suppose you're not even constrained that much. Like, when it comes to books, they would still try to go for something popular, which is not the same as good. And as you can see, the movies, I mean, this is just plain obvious. Movies tend to be permanently stuck at like maybe like a teenager level, if even that. And they're not really aiming to make a great movie. They are aiming for a movie that gets the most butts in seats, which is not the same thing. Especially when it possibly comes to underserved genres and elements, then you might go for like some kind of sci-fi, but you know that the sci-fi fans are not as big. So you might just give them a little bit, right? You know, come on. I'll put in a little bit of sci-fi. So the sci-fi fans can come. But of course, you're not going to go full sci-fi. So this essentially means that you don't really see great sci-fi movies that really focus on the sci-fi. You can at best see a little bit of sci-fi, because as long as the sci-fi fans show up for that, then that is what they get. Either they get ignored, or they get the bare minimum they are willing to show up for. Never more. It just doesn't make sense financially. And the unfortunate reality is that, despite what the audience might claim to like, it's not exactly true. Because the audience tends to like what they like. So they might be sick of remakes and possibly sequels that possibly don't need sequels, or new things that are very much like old things, but that is what they show up for. So again, you're not gonna get, I'm not even necessarily making the claim that they would make good things, but also most people are not really showing up for that. They're gonna show up for more of the same, mass appeal, something. And movies are a great example that they are pretty much destined to be this, because they just cost way too much to make, right? You have to make it bland. The reality is that if you took it to uncharted waters and you made something really unique, what you might find out that realistically, no one really cares. If people cared about such stories, then likely those stories would get remade and get sequels all the time. But generally, that is not the case. So you get to see the same 6 or 7 or possibly even 5 movies and the remake of the same thing. Because I'll bet you and I might be bored to tears at the prospect of another Superman movie. That is, most people are willing to show up for. And as long as you're dealing with a big budget, arguably you can't even make it good for any one particular group. I suppose if your taste is very much in line with mass appeal, then it might be you. But I suppose a good analogy would be a chef that is cooking for millions versus a chef that's cooking just for you. Yet even if the chef can cook for a smaller audience and they would like it more, the temptation to tap into a larger audience would still be there. And by the way, I'm not making the claim that these movies are bad, necessarily, but that they are bland. They meant to be like good enough, something that gets butts in seats. Games are a little bit better off because people can just keep replaying the old games that are good, and I guess in this case popular. Yet still doesn't change the fact that, especially when it comes to bigger studios, they're not trying to make good games, they're trying to make popular games. So they're going for something bland, a little bit for everyone, right? Most of all, make it look good and make it basically a copy of something else and something for everyone. And if they don't do this, then most likely no one cares. And if they do this, then most likely no one cares because okay, who cares? It is bland, copy of something else. And some strike gold, but usually either improvement upon something that is popular or a sequel to something that is popular. Yet, the gaming industry is definitely more healthy for 2 reasons. One would be that you can actually just keep playing the older games, and that's gonna be just great. Second of all, that making a game not necessarily gonna cost that much. There are many indies who make it that are going for underserved niches, I guess. A fast food simulator, I don't care about it. But the point is, they can do these kind of janky stuff that you would never see a bigger game do because they need to appeal to a very wide audience. But the big advantage of indies that, well, I guess one part of them are just willing to go into the dark. Others are really willing to serve niches too, because they see it's underserved. And it might not be worth the time of a big studio, but it is worth their time. And the games that they make can be huge. And clearly many of these are big opportunities, but bigger studios would not go for it first. Once someone struck gold, they're gonna show up possibly bigger and blander, and most likely fail. And while we're here, we should also touch on another media, anime. And making an anime could be in the billions, but it could be less than that. So they are more likely to take chances. And it does show, although there are many who are not really innovative. But the point is, low budget kind of allows a studio to go after niches. But an interesting shift is that we probably live in a world, although seemingly not true for many, where you probably don't care about the movie that is a 5, or a 6, or maybe even a 7, or maybe even an 8. You don't care. There's just so much stuff out there that unless it's an 8 plus, or possibly even a 9, you don't care. But of course, it also needs to be something for you. I'm almost reluctant to recommend anime because if I do, then you might just disappear for a few months, just trying to catch up on the best things. At the very least, there's just so much stuff out there that the guy watching anime, cliche, all the time, is well deserved. And then we're finally gonna touch on the one before last point would be books. Although I mentioned them before, but in this case, to write a book, you would need to spend Let's even suppose that you write like 1 page per 1 hour, right? That might be extreme for some, but let's just go with that. Let's say like 300 hours, maybe more. Let's say that it's gonna be 1,500. Regardless, it is just the time of one person writing the book and whatever value you put on that. But there is an incentive to write something not good, but popular. And that possibly would be my main beef with many books, that they write a popular book. And it's not good. Because I've read it. Not that book, but many like it many times before. It's a popular book with a story I've read hundreds of times. With, I suppose, familiar elements. And it's kind of a tough choice, because either you go for something original that is probably going to be less well received by most, I suppose, or you embrace being a writer, right? You know what is popular, and you just write that. Now, I suppose you can make the claim in some cases that these elements can coexist, but oftentimes there are trade-offs, and this is all assuming that you are some all-knowing person who can make a perfect decision. Most writers would clearly not fall into this camp. They are just essentially, in most cases, copying what they read. Which brings us to the last chain in the link, would be AI. Because what we see is that you cannot have what you like. It always has to be combined with what others like, at a cost to you. But suppose AI can be your personal chef who can cook you exactly what you want. Then it would be extremely enticing. And part of the unfortunate reality out there that suppose there are many things out there that I would like, right? They could be just niches that appeal to me, but I know nothing of them because popular is something that kind of like draws all attention. And not just naturally, but it is pushed into the front because it is kind of expected that whatever they spend on advertising it is just going to come back. So I have no doubt there are probably out there like thousands of books and more that I would enjoy, but finding it is just too much of a hassle. Yet, even if I could find it, it would still not be on the level of exactly what I want. So while in the context of games, you can argue that, sure, some blandness is justified, because in a multiplayer context, you need players to all like the game, I guess. But when it actually comes to the highest rated games, then we can actually see that single player oriented games are most likely to acquire the highest ratings, because this could be just exactly for you. In fact, it can be doubly so, because, for example, RimWorld, you can mod it to your liking. So not only you have a game that you possibly love, but you can tweak it exactly to your liking. That is kind of one of the most tempting things in gaming, at least for me. Because you can have just hundreds of mods, and now you made yourself your perfect game, I suppose. Yet you don't have this choice when it comes to multiplayer games. Your choice is binary. You either play or not. You don't really have an influence over what the game is. And I guess even not much of a choice about who you play with. Or at least who you play against. So even if you do play them, having a team that you like would be great for your sanity. Yet this, in a way, would be still kind of control over what the game is, what the experience is. So interestingly, it might matter less what the game is, but who do you play with and who do you play against? Yeah, let's just circle back to movies. And they are truly the best example where you just see lackluster movies come out all the time. People don't tend to consume or reconsume the older movies, so they just get remade all the time. There's not a big interest in trying to make very unusual movies, I suppose, and go overboard for niches. So you just see bland movies for everyone. But are they for anyone though? And that would be possibly my main question here. Because we live in a world where there are so many things competing for your attention. And personally speaking, I don't tend to care about movies these days. I might watch like, one movie a year, perhaps, maybe 2 years. I think Doom Part 2 was the last movie I saw. That was good. And even in their case, being tied to an established IP, no doubt, helped me to know about it. But at least they actually delivered, right? Even when it comes to YouTube, I don't watch any huge channels, really. I've been known to frequent YouTubers who might have 4 or 5 digit subs because their stuff is good. There are just not that many who care about it, but I did. Yeah, people are highly incentivized to make something popular, right? Even when it comes to books, truly, I would love to see just people go absolutely insane, right? I don't want a popular book. I don't want even a good book, right? Whatever that means. I just want the author to just go nuts. Just go and take it wherever it goes. But also just have fun with it. Just do nutty things that you're not supposed to do in a storytelling way. Because I feel like I heard every single story at least 100 times before. Yet, even if they did, it would not be popular or good, right? So it does make sense to play the meta, and it does make sense to play the meta to the biggest audience you can. So you see that the good writers who write popular stories are so boring. Like, I would not care. Just go wild. Or make it a love letter to a specific audience. Just make it like a 10 out of 10 for them. But you rarely see this. Oddly enough, you would hear more original stories. Well, I guess here possibly not the best way to put it, but see more original stories while playing games than while reading books. While you play games, anything goes, right? The game is not even trying to write you a story. It's just kind of random. But a book kind of is expected to tell a certain story. A good story, by most people's definition, would be something that you would want to hear, something that you almost certainly heard before. And while I could understand the appeal of it, it is a little boring and bland. There is definitely some untapped opportunity in niches, but also I don't have that much of a high hopes unless AI really picks up the slack. Because realistically, people kind of get what they are willing to eat, essentially. So if most people are willing to watch movies that are 6, then that is exactly what most people are going to get. And keep in mind, new people are the best. They don't know anything. They're gonna watch the new Superman movie because it's gonna be the first for them or something. So we don't need new stories. We just need the same stories told to those who haven't heard it yet or possibly want to hear it again. Yet perhaps my positive takeaway would be here is that the more and more possible, the cheaper it becomes to make stuff, essentially. The more lucrative and more necessary it becomes to actually target audiences, to go for niches. Because you can just make a 9 or a 10 for someone instead of trying to serve them the 5. As long as they hear about it, they're going to prefer it, clearly. And perhaps even just making your own TV show in your bedroom, I guess might not be feasible, but it will be feasible to just make something for a small audience. Possibly it's gonna cost you like, tens of thousands, only in that range, to make a story for a niche audience. And it could be a massive hit because they are ridiculously underserved. Either no one cares about them, or possibly they're just giving like a little bit of a like token thing in a much bigger thing to possibly that they show up, right? So in a way, the solution is more stuff and easier to make stuff and cheaper to make stuff. So people don't need to eat garbage or go starving. They can just eat whatever they like. So instead of trying to make everything for everyone, or at least as many people as possible, it would make sense to just actually go after an audience instead of trying to go wide and possibly coming below the radar of a lot of people, basically everyone, right? Supposing everyone has at least a 9, right? Then none of this nonsense would matter. Personally speaking, I don't want to read or hear a good story, whatever that is, right? Essentially, that would mean that the author tries to write a story that the audience would love to hear, right? And most likely heard hundreds of times before. But it's also so predictable. Now, certainly some like exactly that, but that may not be me. So if we are actually evaluating authors by originality, you know who's the most original? Ironically, it would be AI, because they just do the wild stuff. They don't care, they just do it. Saying this all out, it would become self-evident. But of course this sucks. What did you expect? How could it be for you if it tries to be everything for everyone? You can argue that a highly targeted niche can be great, and I would concur. But more and more, it's gonna be possible to get exactly what you like. So, you can have a story just for you, no matter what. And personally, I love to see the 10 out of 10s, the 9 out of 10s. Even if it's not for me, which usually would be the case. But it's a 10 out of 10 for the audience? Now that is great. Instead of trying to, I don't know, watch a 6 together or something. Or read the same bland story together again. Or possibly look at a game that is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy with possibly improved graphics, but it's a flop from the start. I actually have a secret love for the indie community, because you can see people. I snooped around a little bit, and I knew few people, but like I snooped around it and see that most people are not gonna make it, or haven't made it. They tried their thing and they failed, right? And that is kind of unfortunate. But also, I would actually argue that they actually at least tried something that was worth trying. No one cares if you fail at a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, or a, like fourth remake of something. But if you make an indie game and it flops, I can respect that. If you write the story and it just goes nuts and like it just doesn't appeal to most people, possibly even me, it may not be the most wisest choice, but at least it was worth trying. And I guess especially as you possibly get older, you might just get bored of all the things that you've seen before, tried before, played before. Who cares about the 10th remake of Batman? No one. But at least no one should. I'll just make a new story. And not the same style either. And, people kind of like the same kind of story. That's fine, I guess. But it's unlikely to be the 10 out of 10. It is just something that's familiar and, I suppose, commonly enjoyed. Probably no one's favorite movie is gonna be Mufasa the Lion King. I guess live action version. I don't know about it. I'm just seeing it right now. I guess my point is, try to go after stuff that you might love. Try to make stuff that people might love. Instead of making stuff that probably not even gonna work. But even if you did, really not many will care. Yeah, most likely it's going to fail, and it's gonna be just more garbage onto the garbage pile.